The desert remembers. Long before highways cut across the Southwest, before state lines divided Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, there were cities of stone rising from the canyon walls. They are often called the Anasazi, a Navajo word sometimes translated as ancient ones or ancient enemies. Today, many prefer the name ancestral Puebloans, honoring the living descendants who still call this land home. Between roughly 100 AD and 1300 AD, this civilization flourished across what we now call the Four Corners region. They built cliff dwellings, engineered massive stone complexes, tracked the sun and moon with precision, and created trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. And then, many of their great cities were abandoned, not destroyed, not burned to the ground, simply left behind. Who were they? How did they rise? And why did they leave? Let's step back in time. The story begins thousands of years ago with the basket-maker peoples. These early inhabitants of the Southwest were semi-nomadic. They hunted deer and rabbit. They gathered wild plants. And eventually, they began cultivating corn, maize that had slowly migrated north from Mesoamerica. Corn changed everything. With agriculture came permanence. With permanence came villages. By around 750 AD, we enter what archaeologists call the Pueblo I and II periods. Above-ground homes made of stone and adobe began to replace earlier pit houses. Communities grew larger. Ceremonial structures called kivas, circular, subterranean chambers, became central to spiritual life. Kivas were not just rooms, they were cosmological symbols. Many featured a small hole in the floor called a sipapu, representing the portal through which ancestors emerged into this world. This wasn't random construction, this was sacred architecture. Then came the Golden Age. Between 900 and 1150 AD, a place called Chaco Canyon became the beating heart of the ancestral Puebloan world. If you stand in Chaco Canyon today, the silence is overwhelming. But over 1,000 years ago, it was a center of power. Massive great houses rose from the canyon floor. The largest, Pueblo Bonito, once stood 4 or 5 stories high with over 600 rooms. The buildings were aligned with solar and lunar cycles. Doorways and windows framed solstices. Walls follow cardinal directions. They weren't just building homes, they were building a map of the sky in stone. Even more astonishing, timber used in Chaco's construction came from forests over 50 miles away. Thousands upon thousands of logs were carried across harsh desert terrain without wheels, without horses. Why? That question still lingers. Some researchers believe Chaco was a ceremonial center. Others argue it functioned as a political or economic capital, coordinating trade networks that stretched to present-day Mexico. Artifacts found there include macaw feathers, copper bells, and cacao residue, exotic goods that point toward long-distance exchange with Mesoamerican cultures. Chaco was not isolated, it was connected. But Chaco was only part of the story. Centuries later, another architectural marvel emerged: cliff dwellings carved into sheer canyon walls. The most famous example is Cliff Palace, located in Mesa Verde National Park. Imagine climbing a ladder up a 100-foot rock face to reach your home. Cliff Palace contains over 150 rooms and more than 20 kivas. It was built with precision masonry, sandstone blocks carefully shaped and mortared together. From a distance, it almost looks like it grew from the rock itself. Why build in the cliffs? Protection may have played a role. By the late 1200s, evidence suggests increasing conflict in some areas. Cliff alcoves provided natural defense and shelter from the elements, but they also required immense planning and cooperation. These were not scattered survival shelters. They were organized communities. And then something happened. Around 1130 AD, the Southwest entered a prolonged drought. Tree ring data shows decades of severe dryness. Crops failed, water sources diminished, populations strained, fragile environments already pushed to their limits. Chaco Canyon declined first. Construction slowed, roads were abandoned, people dispersed. By the late 1200s, even the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde were left behind. Entire regions were emptied within a few generations. For decades, outsiders called it a mysterious disappearance. But that framing may say more about us than about them. They did not vanish. They moved. Descendant communities, including the Hopi, Zuni, and Rio Grande Pueblos, trace their heritage directly back to these ancestral builders. Oral traditions speak of migrations, of searching for balance, of leaving places when the time was right. To them, it was not collapse, it was transformation. Still, the archaeological record raises difficult questions. Some sites from the final occupation period show signs of violence, burned structures, defensive walls, skeletal remains with trauma, evidence of social stress. Were resources so scarce that communities turned against one another? Did climate change fracture long-standing alliances? We may never fully know. What we do know is this: the ancestral Puebloans were extraordinarily adaptive for over 1,000 years. They engineered check dams and irrigation systems. They built roads radiating outward from Chaco for miles in straight lines. They aligned architecture with celestial events. They observed the sky. They honored the land. They built for generations. And when conditions changed beyond sustainability, they chose migration over extinction. There's something haunting about walking through these ancient stone rooms. The handprints in the plaster, the soot marks above fire pits, the view from a cliff-dwelling balcony at sunset. You realize these were not ruins to the people who built them. They were homes. Children laughed here. Corn was ground on stone metates. Ceremonies echoed in kivas lit by firelight. Civilization is not defined by skyscrapers or empires. It is defined by memory. And the memory of the ancestral Puebloans still lives, not only in stone, but in living Pueblo communities whose traditions, languages, and ceremonies continue today. So why does their story matter? Because it is a reminder. They thrived in a harsh environment through ingenuity and cooperation. But even advanced societies are not immune to climate stress, resource depletion, and social tension. Their story echoes into the present. And perhaps the real mystery is not why they left, but whether we are listening.